And welcome everybody to another edition of the GSMC Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. As always, I'm your host, Kenneth Grunfelder, and it's great to have you guys here on this Thursday, February 8th. We have a lot to talk about on the show today. But before I get into that, I just want to remind you guys to tip or donate, get your comments recognized. Make sure to go to the following link. That is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Again, that really helps the show, makes the show more interactive between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers. Again, that is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. And as always, it is displayed on the ticker on the bottom of the show segment down below. And actually, really excited today, we actually have a guest. One of the GSMC hosts, the host of the GSMC Sports Podcast, and that is TJ. TJ, welcome to the show. How you doing today?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of
I'm
course.
excited we can do this.
Yep. Yeah, so this is something that we're going to try to do a lot, is to have each other appear on the shows. It's good because it's not, then you don't have to just listen to me talk for an hour. You got more perspectives. So you'll see me appear on other shows. You'll see TJ appear on other shows as well. He does a great job on the sports podcast. So really with the show today, he's going to join us for 3/4 of the show. We'll do the first three segments together. The final segment will just be me. So we'll talk about the Super Bowl. I know we've been talking about it even on his show too a lot, with that just being the final game of the NFL season. So we'll talk about that to start off the show. Second part of the show, we'll talk about, this is something both of us have talked about a little bit actually, is the fact that are the Chiefs the next villain in the NFL? So we'll get into that. The third part of the show with the NFL honors coming up, we'll talk about who we think is going to win each award. And then after that, it'll just be me. I'll talk about the Giants, Saquon Barkley, where he could possibly go if he does not return to the Giants. So let's get right into the first topic, which is talking about the Super Bowl, which is obviously something that, again, we've talked about a bunch of times. So TJ, what are your thoughts about this game? Like, who do you? Well, I don't know if you want to say who you think is going to win, but what are some of the things that you see happening in this game?
Well, so yesterday on my show, I sort of went through the list of different positional groups, and I think that a lot of people are talking about the fact that the 49ers have the overall most complete roster. And while I wouldn't fully push back on that, I do think that the Chiefs have the one up in a lot of these key positions. Obviously, we've talked in length about how good their defense has been this season and has really been the revelation for this Chiefs team is being able to sort of switch their identity a little bit from being that high flying, explosive play, offense carried team that almost, if you look at sort of how other teams have mirrored the style of it, they've sort of changed the game. And now they're able to win the game in the trenches a little bit more. Their defensive front is just so stacked. And I think that I was surprised personally for the Chiefs to be underdogs in this game. For again, I think their roster as a whole, we obviously know the issues they have with their receiving core, but I think their roster as a whole is very talented and they have Patrick Mahomes.
Yep.
So just taking them as an underdog again seems pretty it's I just for me, I found it surprising that Vegas and all of these sports books would give fans the opportunity yet again to bet on an underdog Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah. Honestly, it does make me a little worried because I did talk about this yesterday. That one of my coworkers at my other job, I've gone against him quite a few times because one example I would say is when the Bills were playing the Chargers, and he was like, don't be surprised, Brandon Staley, first game without him, the Chargers will be competitive, and they'll cover the spread, and I'm like, yeah, I'm still gonna roll with the Bills, and I ended up being wrong. So now again with this game, it's like everybody is now going with the Chiefs because they're an underdog. And, for me, and something we've talked about a lot with everybody else at GSMC is, can't bet against Patrick Mahomes. But at the same time, it's like you got everybody now going with the Chiefs, especially with them being an underdog, and that does worry me a little bit. But then again, you look at the 49ers and how they've started off really slow on offense in these first two playoff games against the Packers and against the Lions. If you fall behind against the Chiefs, I don't think you're going to be able to come back because the Chiefs hardly blow leads. The one lead that I still don't get how it happened was the AFC Championship game a couple years ago against the Bengals because they were up 21-3 and they blew that lead, and that was at home. So other than that, they really don't blow leads that often. And I think in this game, they have the defense, like you were saying, that I think could definitely give Brock Purdy some problems. And you go back to the Packers game. I mean, Darnell Savage almost had another pick six. He dropped it. He's been fortunate. And then also, although it was a great play and one of the top plays of Championship Sunday, that should have been an interception too. The pass that IU caught off the rebound. So that worries me a little bit. But at the same time, the 49ers have a ton of playmakers. Their defense is really good. Although I will say, run defense has been a little suspect as of late.
Well, really for both teams, they're both two good defensive cores, but if there is any sort of vulnerability on either side,
it's the run defense.
It is the run game, and I think that is going to play a huge factor in this game because, I mean, that was the conversation coming out of championship weekend the other week was the Ravens' lack of sticking with their identity and running the ball.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing, too, that still made no sense. I mean, you only ran the ball, what was it, 6 times the whole game? Yeah, that really didn't make any sense. And in the past, between Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes, the Ravens' defense was injured. They'd give up a lot of points to the Chiefs. This defense is one of the best. It might be the best defense Lamar Jackson's ever had, and they kept him in the game. But they kept throwing it. They just did not go back to the run. So that still really puzzles me.
Well, and that's the thing too is we talked about. I totally agree. The 49ers have not looked like the 49ers team that we sort of expected coming into the playoffs. Now, they were a little thrown off. They lose Debo early in that Packers game after preparing to have him for 2 weeks. So the offensive game plan gets thrown off a little bit, but I thought they were outplayed for the most part in that game. They obviously make the big plays at the end to come back, but like you said, sort of got a lot of breaks and then that slow start against the Lions. So it's not like you can look at that body of work and really put too much faith in the Niners off of that. But then on the Chiefs side, they have gone into two opposing teams' territories, and these are Patrick Mahomes' first true road games in his career. So credit to that. But I also think that between the injuries in the Miami Dolphins and Buffalo Bills, really defenses as a whole, the pass rushers, the linebackers, the Bills also missing their cornerback one. Like, I didn't think that they were tested too much on that defensive side of the ball through their first couple wins. And then, like you were just talking about, I mean, they don't blow leads, but it's not like their offense really did all too much to protect their lead. Yeah, they went out and they got that lead off of some really efficient first couple drives for them. But after that, I mean, the Ravens, they were begging the Ravens to stay in that game and to come back. And I thought it was a lot of self-inflicted wounds on the Ravens side. So 2 great rosters, obviously, but I think it also just goes to speak about kind of the level of parity and how we are a little bit without that true flawless juggernaut in the NFL right now.
Mm-hmm. And then also the other thing too, with the 49ers, another weakness you could point to is their secondary. And I know from watching the championship game, Kevin Burkhardt was saying on the telecast how, the pass rush really hasn't been getting home like they're supposed to. I mean, they go out and they get Chase Young at the trade deadline. And I know, Steve Wilkes wasn't happy with the effort in the championship game because you watch the Jahmyr Gibbs rushing touchdown and Chase Young doesn't even look like he's trying on that play to tackle him. So I think that's like a big key in this game is for the Niners. They got to get home. Like Bosa's got to get him, Armstead and Chase Young, they got to get after Mahomes. Now, even when saying that, Mahomes can get out of the pocket and move around. Especially you go back to last year's Super Bowl, even on, when he hurt his ankle, earlier in the playoffs last year. I mean, he took off for that big scramble to set up, Butker kicking essentially the game-winning field goal to win the game. So, you could get after Mahomes, but he can move out of the pocket just like anybody. I mean, you could look at Lamar Jackson. His game, he is more of a. I mean, he's gotten better as a passer, but you would look at him and say like he's probably the best runner when it comes to all the quarterbacks, along with
Definitely.
Josh Allen. So that's important. Is getting after Mahomes, maybe getting him off his spot, because the secondary is something I also worry about. Because I go back to last year's matchup, and Mahomes threw for over 400 yards in that game. Now, again, that was last year. It's a new year. I understand that. But still, Mahomes has played the 49ers before, and you still have a lot of those players from, the previous couple of matchups that, Mahomes has faced them. So that's another thing that I worry about, too. And because we've seen the 49ers and their secondary and how they've struggled. You go back to the Bengals game when Joe Burrow was healthy and the Bengals were hot. The Vikings the week before that during that losing streak. That's another thing that I worry about is the Niners secondary.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. It starts with that front line because you look at the names that the 49ers have on the defensive line, and they should be getting home. You have Nick Bosa, you go out and you get a Chase Young, who was obviously the number 2 overall pick and had a great rookie year. Obviously, I mean, I think that the fact that Washington was willing to move off of him maybe says something, but there were also plenty of teams that were looking to trade for him. I think he is a very good player. Maybe it's some of the effort issues that were highlighted in that Detroit game. But I mean, you look at the AFC Championship game and those first 2 drives, I thought that the Chiefs were doing a really good job of protecting Patrick Mahomes. And when he can just sit back there, he's not going to miss throws. I mean, he completed his first 10. The first time it was an incompletion. He was throwing to a little bit more of an inexperienced receiver. And I sort of read it as I think that the receiver just maybe didn't sit down in the spot that Mahomes wanted than necessarily him missing the throws. But then they were able to get a little bit more push up front and sort of slow down their game plan. But you're right, that secondary for the 49ers, I mean, it's never going to be easy when you lose your all pro in the group with Hufanga, who they lost
Right. Yep.
halfway through the season, and they're relying on a little bit more inexperienced Jair Brown. He's a 3rd-round rookie for them, and he's been doing fine in the secondary for them. Ambry Thomas, one of their cornerbacks, he wasn't supposed to be a starter
Yeah,
really.
I've seen people complain about him too.
Yeah. And he's had his moments where he's all right, but all in all, especially when you're going up against a Patrick Mahomes, who, like you said, getting pressure on him is one thing, actually bringing him down
Right.
is a whole nother because he's just about as good as anybody in the league as far as evading that pressure. But you got to at least sort of disrupt it. And I know that we've seen so many times in the past of Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes sort of improvising on the fly. But I think that that's where sort of these other receivers forcing them to make plays, especially off script, is where you can maybe try and take advantages here. But like you said, I think that it comes down to being able to move Mahomes off of his spot to sort of help protect your secondary if you're San Francisco.
Yeah. Yeah, good stuff there. So we're actually going to continue our conversation with the Chiefs. We're going to take our first break of the show, and then when we come back, we'll talk about. Again, this is something that we've both talked about on our shows: are the Chiefs the new villain of the NFL? So that is what we'll talk about when we come back from our first break. So stick around, and we'll be right back here on the GSMC Football Podcast.